In the heart of the dense forest stood a village forgotten by time, whispered about in hushed tones by those brave enough to acknowledge its existence. They called it Whispering Hollow, a place where shadows danced in eerie silence and the air hung heavy with the weight of unspoken secrets. Few dared to venture into its depths, for the villagers believed it to be cursed, haunted by restless spirits of the past. It was amidst this chilling backdrop that a lone traveler by the name of Jonathan found himself drawn to the mystery of Whispering Hollow. Armed with nothing but his curiosity and a thirst for adventure, he embarked on a journey into the unknown, determined to unravel the enigma that shrouded the village in darkness. As he made his way through the thick undergrowth, Jonathan could feel an otherworldly presence looming ever closer, like a shroud enveloping his senses. The trees whispered their warnings, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, beckoning him to turn back before it was too late. But Jonathan pressed on, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement. Eventually, he emerged from the dense foliage into a clearing bathed in an eerie twilight. Before him lay the village of Whispering Hollow, its dilapidated buildings standing as silent sentinels against the backdrop of an ominous sky. Jonathan felt a chill run down his spine as he took in the desolate scene before him, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. Prepared by the oppressive atmosphere, Jonathan ventured further into the heart of the village, his footsteps echoing against the cobblestone streets like a drumbeat in the stillness of the night. Each building he passed seemed to exude an aura of malevolence, their broken windows staring out like empty eye sockets, watching his every move with an unspoken menace. As he explored the deserted streets, Jonathan became increasingly aware of a sense of being watched, as though unseen eyes followed his every move from the shadows. The feeling of unease grew with each passing moment, until he could no longer shake the sensation that he was not alone in Whispering Hollow. Seeking refuge from the encroaching darkness, Jonathan stumbled upon a small clearing at the edge of the village, where a gnarled tree stood sentinel against the backdrop of the moonlight sky. Its branches twisted and contorted in grotesque shapes, casting long, sinister shadows that seemed to dance in the moonlight. Despite the ominous appearance of the tree, Jonathan felt drawn to it, as though some unseen force compelled him to approach. With each step he took, the air grew colder, and a sense of foreboding settled over him like a suffocating blanket. Yet still, he pressed on, his curiosity overpowering his fear. As he reached out to touch the twisted trunk of the tree, a sudden gust of wind tore through the clearing, sending a shiver down Jonathan's spine. And then, in the blink of an eye, the world around him shifted, twisting and contorting into a nightmarish landscape of darkness and despair. The tree before him seemed to come alive, its branches reaching out like grasping claws, its trunk pulsating with an otherworldly energy. Jonathan stumbled back in horror, his heart pounding in his chest as he realized the true nature of the creature. It was not a tree at all, but a malevolent spirit, trapped for eternity within its twisted form. As Jonathan watched in terror, the spirit coalesced into a swirling vortex of darkness, its form shifting and changing with each passing moment. And then, with a deafening roar, it lunged at him, its ethereal tendrils reaching out to him. Jonathan tried to run, but it was no use. The spirit was upon him, its icy touch searing his skin as it dragged him into the depths of its twisted embrace. He screamed out in terror, his voice drowned out by the howling wind as he was... And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. Jonathan lay crumpled on the ground, his body broken and lifeless, a victim of the haunted village of Whispering Hollow. As the spirit retreated back into the depths of its twisted realm, the village fell silent once more, its secrets buried beneath a shroud of darkness for eternity. The office was silent, save for the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall. Jenna sat alone at her desk, surrounded by a sea of darkness that seemed to swallow everything in its path. It was past midnight, and she was the only one left in the building. As a diligent employee, Jenna often stayed late to finish her work. But tonight, an eerie feeling crept over her, making her skin prickle with unease. She glanced around the dimly lit office, feeling as though unseen eyes were watching her every move. Her computer screen cast an eerie glow across the room, illuminating the rows of empty desks and filing cabinets. Jenna shook her head, trying to dispel the feeling of dread that lingered in the air. As she returned her attention to her work, Jenna couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was as if the shadows themselves were alive, whispering secrets that sent shivers down her spine. She tried to focus on the task at hand, typing away at her keyboard with trembling fingers. Suddenly, a soft thud echoed through the office, causing Jenna to jump in her seat. She glanced around, her heart pounding in her chest. "Is anyone there?" She called out, her voice barely above a whisper. There was no response, only the sound of her own rapid breathing filling the air. Jenna stood up slowly, her eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. The office seemed to stretch on forever, the shadows dancing along the walls like sinister spectres. With trembling hands, Jenna reached for her phone, her fingers fumbling as she dialed security. But as the line rang, a cold gust of wind swept through the office, extinguishing the lights in an instant. Jenna gasped in shock, her heart racing as darkness enveloped her. Panic surged through her veins as she groped blindly for her phone, her fingers scraping against the smooth surface of her desk. She could hear the pounding of her heart in her ears as she struggled to remain calm. "This can't be happening," she muttered to herself, her voice trembling with fear. In the pitch-black darkness, Jenna's mind began to play tricks on her. Shadows seemed to twist and contort into grotesque shapes, whispering sinister secrets that sent chills down her spine. She felt as though she was being watched, a pair of unseen eyes boring into her soul. Desperate to escape the suffocating darkness, Jenna groped her way towards the door, her heart pounding in her chest. But as her hand closed around the cold metal handle, she froze in terror. A voice echoed through the darkness, a chilling whisper that sent shivers down her spine. "Leave now while you still can," the voice hissed, its tone dripping with malice. Jenna's blood ran cold as she recoiled in horror. Who or what was speaking to her? She wanted to run, to flee from this nightmare, but fear rooted her to the spot. The voice spoke again, closer this time, its words sending a jolt of terror through her. "You cannot escape. We are everywhere." Trembling, Jenna tore the door open and stumbled into the hallway, the darkness seeming to swallow her whole. She raced towards the stairwell, her heart pounding in her chest as she fled from whatever lurked in the shadows. But with each step she took, the darkness seemed to close in around her, as if the very walls of the building were alive and closing in. Her heart pounding in her chest as she raced towards the ground floor. She could hear the sound of her own ragged breathing echoing through the stairwell, mingling with the sinister whispers that seemed to follow her every move. With a cry of despair, Jenna turned and fled into the night, her heart pounding in her chest as she raced through the empty streets. She could feel the eyes of the shadows boring into her back, their whispers echoing in her ears as she ran for her life. But no matter how fast she ran, she could not escape the darkness that pursued her. It followed her like a relentless predator, a malevolent force that sought to consume her soul. And as Jenna disappeared into the night, the shadows closed in around her, swallowing her whole and dragging her into the depths of darkness from which there was no escape. The office building stood silent and empty, a monument to the horrors that lurked within its walls. And as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, it cast long, twisted shadows that seemed to dance with sinister glee, a silent reminder of the darkness that lurked just beneath the surface of the world. The rain poured down relentlessly, a torrential deluge that seemed determined to wash away the very fabric of the night. Lightning streaked across the sky in jagged bolts, illuminating the landscape in brief. Stark thunder rumbled like the growl of some primordial beast, reverberating through the darkness with an ominous intensity. In the midst of this tempest, Jack's car struggled forward, its windshield wipers working overtime to clear away the sheets of rain. Inside, Jack gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckle determination, his knuckles stark against the dim glow of the dashboard lights. He had been driving for what felt like hours, the storm showing no signs of abating, and his nerves were frayed to the breaking point. But just when Jack thought he couldn't take it any longer, a beacon of hope appeared on the horizon, the flickering neon sign of a roadside cafe. Relief flooded through him as he veered off the desolate highway and into the parking lot of the welcoming Oasis. The cafe loomed before him like a sanctuary against the fury of the storm, its warm lights promising respite from the cold and darkness outside. With a grateful sigh, Jack shut off the engine and stepped out into the downpour, his coat pulled tight around him against the chill of the night. Inside, the cafe was a haven of warmth and light, though its atmosphere was tinged with an unmistakable air of solitude. Jack shrugged off his coat and shook the rain from his hair, his senses coming alive with the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the soft murmur of distant conversation. Or at least, that's what he thought he heard. As Jack glanced around the cafe, he realized with a jolt that he was alone. Utterly, completely alone. No other patrons sat at the tables, no waitstaff bustled behind the counter. It was as if the cafe existed in a bubble of isolation, untouched by the outside world. Unease prickled at the back of Jack's neck as he made his way to a booth near the window, his footsteps echoing hollowly in the empty space. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about this place, that he was being watched by unseen eyes from the shadows. But Jack brushed aside his misgivings and focused on the simple pleasure of a hot cup of coffee, ordering from the ancient-looking menu with a weary smile. As he waited for his drink to arrive, Jack gazed out into the storm, watching as the rain hammered against the window pane with relentless fury. But as the minutes ticked by and his coffee failed to materialize, Jack's sense of unease returned with a vengeance. Where was the waitress? Why was the cafe deserted on a night like this? And why did he feel as though he was being drawn into some scene? Before Jack could ponder these questions any further, strange things began to happen in the cafe. Objects moved of their own accord. Chairs scraped across the floor as if pulled by invisible hands, and whispers echoed through the empty space like the susurrus of the wind. Fear coiled in the pit of Jack's stomach as he watched these spectral phenomena unfold before his eyes. He knew he should leave, run far away from this place and never look back. But something held him rooted to his seat, a morbid curiosity that compelled him to stay and unravel the mystery of the ghostly presence haunting the cafe. Gathering his courage, Jack rose from his booth and began to explore the cafe. His footsteps, and then just as he reached the far corner of the cafe, Jack saw it. A figure lurking in the shadows, its form twisted and contorted in ways that defied the laws of nature. Its eyes burned with a cold, otherworldly light, fixated on Jack with a hunger that sent shivers down his spine. It was the ghostly presence he had sensed from the moment he stepped foot in the cafe, and it was clear that it had no intention of letting him leave alive. With a strangled cry, Jack turned to flee, but it was too late. The ghostly figure surged forward, its icy fingers wrapping around his throat with a grip like iron. Jack gasped for breath, his vision swimming as darkness closed in around. And as the storm raged on outside, the lone cafe stood silent and empty once more, its secrets buried deep within its walls. For Jack, there would be no escape from the horrors that lurked within, only an eternity of darkness and despair.